everybody, it's Alyce-Kay Ruckelshaus, and I am here for take 2 of the timeline. I did a timeline video, and it turned out that my battery ran out during taping or recording, and so yeah, it didn't catch any of it because I guess it saves it after you're done probably. Anyway, we're gonna do it over again. What you need to have for this is a pen or pencil, and most people probably would prefer to do a pencil and then you can go over it with a pen. I cannot use pencils, so I just start out with a pen. You want a ruler, any size, a foot-long ruler is fine. And you want your journal, whatever it is, whether it's your Abraham journal or a regular journal or a 8.5 by 11 or any size of a what do you call this, spiral notebook. You could even use a little spiral notebook, but you'd have to use a lot of pages, and your Bible. Okay, and I think that's it. Okay, so there are a couple things I wanted to do before getting into the timeline. One is I had talked about, it helps to have a piece of cardboard. This comes from my cat food. The canned cat food that we use has cardboard in it, and so Bill saves them for me because whenever I give or sell a junk journal, I put one of these in with it, because if you have buttons on a page like this right here, then it helps for writing on it. Okay, and so when you're doing your timeline and you're sticking the pins through, not quite sure where not a timeline, when you're doing your map and you're sticking the pins through, you can put it behind that so it doesn't put pin marks in any of the other maps. Okay, all right. Oh cool, I just realized my map is on the other side of Abraham and Sarah's journey. That's perfect. Oh my goodness, that was not on purpose. I love it when things work out that way. Okay, and here's my map after I colored it. I could not find my colored pencils. They're probably up at our house in the mountains. We moved everything up there a year ago, and it's, we were planning to move, and so, we didn't pack everything so that you could find it a year later. And so things are in, kind of disarray, and I can't find things. So I used felt pens, markers. I'll show you the markers that I used. I really would still recommend, whatchamacallit, these are the markers. They're too dark. I would really recommend using colored pencil. That's going to be the best. It's going to be the thing that you can write on easiest and everything. But this worked in a pinch, and it kind of shows you that if you don't have what I'm saying is best, still do it. Use what you have. Watercolors, if you had watercolors, that would probably be better than this. It would probably be as good as colored pencils, maybe even easier to do. Okay, so here's all my places marked, and this was through doing the pin pricks. Otherwise, I'm not a good map maker. So, I didn't put how much each inch equals. I need to add that to it. So, and probably a title for it. So anyway, so I still need to add my legend. But that's basically how the finished thing looks. I'm saving the other map, Abraham's, whatever. I'm saving the other map to do later, just in case you all have questions about this, so that I have another map that I'm ready to work with. Okay, so that's that. So we're going to work on our timeline today, which I'm really excited about. This is really fun. Before we get into doing it in the journal, though, I want to show you a great resource for this. Okay, I bought this 500 million years ago. It was published in 1992. I probably got it right after it was published. And I think it was like $30 or $40. It's now $189 or $185 or something if you get it new. But I found it used on Amazon for $4, and with shipping it's $8, and on up, quite a few of them are under $20. So I would strongly recommend getting this, not just for this study. This is great for anything where you're studying the Bible or any place in the world, really, because I'll show you. Anyway, so mine has been through a lot. Look at that, poor thing. I used this obviously for homeschooling. That was the main thing that I used it for. And then it was one of the things that we had moved up to the house, because we moved almost everything up there. And we had a pipe break right over a box of books, and this was in it. Fortunately, when I got this book, I had covered all the pages. It opens out into this long timeline. It's like 16 pages long of foldouts. You thought my timeline in my journal is incredible? No, this is like really major. And maybe this is what gave me the idea, I don't know. anyway, so this all opens out. It's not like a book where you flip the pages, although if you don't open it out, you are flipping pages. And this is all like one long sheet, but because of the pipe breaking and it getting wet, it tore. But I had covered this all with contact paper, front and back. And that's what saved it. Otherwise, it would have been completely wrecked. So I'm so glad that I did that. And if I remember right, it took like almost a whole roll, or maybe even more than a roll. I can't remember. But I used to cover everything with contact paper, clear contact paper. So anyway, if you get one, I would really, 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 really recommend doing that. Not just in case your pipe breaks, but it'll just really help with wear and tear. But anyway, one of the things that's really cool about this, let me make sure it's in camera, there we go, is that, okay, all this yellow stuff is your Bible timeline. Okay, that's the stuff that was happening in the Bible. And he has the year, and right here, this is BC, obviously. He has what happened. He has the Bible reference. Okay, and then under that is what was happening in Egypt is what's in orange. What was happening in Mesopotamia is in green. What was happening in the Mediterranean is in this teal blue, okay? And then what was happening in the rest of the world is in kind of this purplish blue. I guess you'd call that periwinkle. And anyway, one of the things I really want to do is I want to go through and read this again, read this part, the world part, because I teach Chinese kids now, and I want to see what was happening in China while these various things were happening in the Bible and stuff, and just see how that relates. That's just very, very cool. So anyway, so it's a neat, oh, and another thing that it has is it has a lot of classic paintings or photographs of things. Obviously not everything, but quite a few things. And that's really neat. It has a few maps. They're helpful, but they're not as good as like the map that we're using. So anyway, yeah, just lots of good stuff. And then you've got the years right along the bottom that you can look at. So fortunately for us, the page that we want is not attached to the rest of the book right now, so we can get rid of the rest of the book. And that will make it easier. So that's the proverbial silver lining to that cloud. Okay, so what we are going to do is first we want to figure out the dates that we want to put in our timeline. Okay, and I've already done the timeline in my journal because I thought that I was recording, and let me check again to make sure this is still recorded. Yes, it is. Okay, so but I'm going to run through everything just as if I'm doing it right now. We're going to go through figuring it out and everything. And you guys, with this and with the maps, in the future, I will be saying, do a map of such and such, and I'll probably show you or put a link to where you can get the map, but I'm not going to go through all the steps of it. You can refer back to this video for the instructions if you don't remember, and the same thing with the timeline entries, so that we don't have to spend like a whole lesson just putting in the timeline. So that's why I'm spending more time on it now, so that it's more effective. The other thing is, both the maps and the timelines and pretty much anything else that I'm doing in this study is not just to teach you about Abraham, but to teach you about how to do Bible study. This is stuff that you can use for studying any passage of Scripture, and particularly the stories of different people or biographies of different people, because that's what we're doing right now. But I want to give you Bible study tools, not just information about Abraham. So you could take this and, like, if you decided that you wanted to study Joshua or Jesus or Paul, whatever, David, whoever, you can use these same things that we're doing here to study that on your own or to study it with a group. Okay, so what I've done is I went through in my Bible, I went through what we've gone over so far, and I wrote down the main events, the events that would have times. So like Terah moved out of Ur of the Chaldeans, and he moved to Haran. So I wrote here, Terah and family to Haran, and then I put the reference, Genesis 11:26 through 32. Okay, so GEN is an abbreviation for Genesis, and I think usually people write their references like this, where I have Genesis 12:10. That's usually how you write it. I write it like this because one of my professors in college wrote it like that, and I liked it, and so I'm in that habit. But this is usually how you'll see it. and probably how you want to write it. Okay, if you see FF after something, and this isn't just mine, you're going to see this in a lot of Bible things, FF means the verses following. And if you have a, what do you call it, cross-reference in your Bible, like I do, and sometime I'll try to remember to show you guys how to use the cross-reference. It's really fun, and it's very helpful. But if you have that, sometimes you'll see the FF, or just an F means just the one verse following. Okay, so so I have Terah and family to Haran, Genesis 11:26 through 32. Okay, so then the next thing that we have is that God calls Abraham to Canaan, or Abram to Canaan. That's in chapter 12, verses 1 through 4, and he was 75 years old. YO is years old. That's just my abbreviation. So he's 75 years old, and that's important that we know that because of figuring out other things for the timeline. The first altar was at Shechem, and that's Genesis 12:7 right here. Okay, so the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I'll give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him, and that's in Shechem. We know that from verse 6, so I should actually say 6 through 7. Okay, and then the next thing is that Abram builds his second altar between Bethel is how most people pronounce it. I try to say Bethel because that reminds us that it's house of God. Whenever you see Beth, B-E-T-H, or Bet, it would be house, and El is God, so the house of God. Bethel or Betel, and Ai, which a lot of people now pronounce I, is Genesis 12:8. So that's the second altar. Then we have the famine. Abram goes to Egypt to get away from the famine, and that's where he tells Sarai to say that she's his sister, and so she's taken into Pharaoh's harem. Genesis 12:10 and following. And then back to the second altar, Genesis 13:3. So that's back to the altar that's between Bethel and Ai. And then Abram and Lot split up, Genesis 13. War with the kings, Genesis 14. And then we went to the end of Abram's story to find out when he died. Okay, so Abram breathed his last. He lived, in verse 7 of chapter 25, he lived 175 years. So he was 175 years old. And we're going to put Genesis 25, 7 and 8. 25, 7 through 8. And you'll see why it's important to have that right now, even though we haven't gotten there in our study. Otherwise, we're just doing the things that we've studied. The war with the kings we haven't studied yet, but that'll be the next thing. So we're going to go ahead and put that in. Okay, so that gives us the things that we need to look for. Now, as far as looking at a resource for your timeline, I'm going to be using this book that I have. However, you are welcome to use anything else, and if you don't get this book, then you might want to use whatever you're going to be using for any other studies. You can look things up online. You might have a timeline someplace else, some other resource or anything. I just want to tell you that, and I'm not saying that this one's better than whatever else you might find. In fact, if you look online, you might find something more accurate because there's been more research done since 1992. But what I'm saying is timelines might be different. We're using a lot of different information. A lot of things are dug up that help us to correct what we thought we already knew. There's a lot of criteria for determining things that happened 4,000 years ago. So nothing's exactly accurate, and so some of the things are guesses, and so timelines are going to differ. So I would just recommend that you choose one resource and stick with it, whether it's this book, which I really love, even if maybe it's a little off if there's been some new findings. Just stick with one resource so that your timeline's going to follow and not get all kind of confusing from having, changing from one resource to another. The other thing that I wanted to mention is if any of this is like confusing to you or anything, please don't hesitate to ask questions down in the comments below. If you have questions, probably somebody else has the same question, or maybe they haven't thought of that question, and once they hear your question, they're going to go, oh yeah, that's a good question. That way I'll know. And if it's something that I can answer there, I will. Otherwise, I'll make another extra video explaining it. I want to make sure that this is something that you understand because this is a really important tool, as are the maps. So same thing with the maps. Okay, so your timeline itself. Oh, wait, first, before we do that, let's figure out our years. Okay, so we've got our list here of what we want to do so far. And I would also recommend writing these years once you find them. Write them in your Bible, in the text. I might do that today. I might not. It might just be too many things and too confusing for me to do. When I'm on video, I start getting a little flustered, and I have a hard time remembering things anyway, but it just gets even worse when I'm on video. So anyway, so Terah moving his family to Haran. Let's find out where that is. Okay, so here we have Haran, Abram's brother, dying in 1930, and these are BC. So you're going to see these numbers getting smaller because it's like a number line, you know, where you have 0. Okay, well, 0 is supposedly where Christ was born, but that was probably actually 4 AD. But this is how our years work. Okay, so we're here in 2019. Okay, we had 1000 right here. Okay, but BC, this is AD. BC is before Christ, or sometimes you'll see BCE, which is before the Common Era. That's what people use who don't want to say before Christ. And so your numbers are going to go backwards here, because if it's, 1 year before Christ is going to be closer to the 0 than 4 years before Christ, right? Does that make sense? Okay, and so we're going back all the way to 1925 BC. Okay, so that's 1925 BC. That's almost 2,000 years before Christ. Okay, so right here, Terah and his family, including Abram, Sarah, and Lot, migrate from Ur to Haran in far northwestern Mesopotamia. Okay, so they're going to Haran, and that's Genesis 11:31. Okay, so we've got 11:26 through 32, because I'm just kind of quoting that whole section. And that was in 1925. So let's go ahead and write 1925 over here. I'm going to write BC above it, just so that we don't forget. All right, and then we have God calls Abram to Canaan. So right here, God commands Abraham to leave Terah's household and go into an unknown land. God promises to make him a great nation. Abraham is 75 and childless. Okay, and that's important. He's going to be made into a great nation. How's that going to happen when he doesn't have a child? So that's really, really important to the story. So this happened in 1920 BC. So we're going to write 1920 here. Okay, then Abram and Sarah migrate into Canaan along with Lot and a large household in 1920. So I'm not going to make a separate entry for that. Abraham settles first at Shechem in central Canaan. God promises to give the land to his descendants. Okay, so we have that here. We've got our first altar is 1919. Okay, so I'm going to write 1919. Okay, the second altar. The next thing that we have on the timeline, so in other words, they don't know when he built the second altar. The next thing that we have is this famine. Abram migrates to Egypt. Am I in the camera here? I can't tell. Sorry. Okay, Abram migrates to Egypt to avoid the famine in Canaan. Okay, and he calls Sarah his sister. So that's all here. That's in 1918. So we're going to put that there. So sometime in there, 1919, 1918, is when the second altar is built. So these things happen in pretty quick progression right here. Okay, then, where was I? Okay, so then Pharaoh angrily sends Abram and Sarah out of Egypt. That's also in 1918, so that's when they went back to the second altar. 1918, back to the second altar. And then in 1915 is when Abraham and Lot separate. And actually he's still Abram then, but I think Robinson, the guy who made this, is just trying to simplify it. But Abram and Lot separate, and Lot settles near Sodom, Abram settles near Hebron. Okay, so 1915 is when they split up. 1915. Okay, and then the next event is the Mesopotamian kings attack Canaan, and Lot is captured. So that's 1911. Okay, so now we've got our dates. So we can put aside, we can put this aside and we can start working with our timeline. Oh, that was one other thing I was going to tell you guys. I should have told you at the beginning. One thing that I do when I'm listening to YouTube videos, because I watch a lot of YouTube videos, I have certain speakers that I trust, and so I really like watching their sermons and teachings or whatever, but a lot of times they're really long. You can speed that up, and you can go over on the left, there's a little wheel at the bottom of your video, and you can click on that, and then it'll say playback speed, and you can choose to speed it up. I often speed things up to 150%, sometimes 125 if the person talks quickly. If they talk really fast, like I probably do, you might not be able to speed mine up, but try it. That will make it a lot faster to listen to if you're short on time. Just a tip. Okay, you can listen to me at regular speed if you want to. You can slow me down if I talk too fast. Okay, so we're going to go to our timeline, and like I said, I already did this, but I'm going to show it all to you. Our timeline in this journal, if you made the Abraham journal, is right in the centerfold. If you didn't make the Abraham journal, that's okay. There's a few different things that you can do. If you're using, what happened to my notebook? If you're using a regular spiral notebook, then you can just, choose wherever you want to have your timeline. And you can make flip outs like this if you want to. I'll include the link to the tutorial for this in the description box. So you can make flip outs if you want to, or you can have it go from page to page. I really like having flip outs because I like being able to see it all at once. And I think that with Abram's life, it is really helpful to be able to see it all at once, because there's a lot of waiting. And seeing how long he waits really gives you some life lessons. So that's one way that you can do it. You can also do it by having, several lines all on one page, but I would not recommend that because you're going to want to write a lot in those spaces. Another way that you can do it, and really if you can't do it this way, this is what I would say is the next best, is to make your timeline on a wall. When I was homeschooling my 3 oldest girls, our timeline went all through our house along the top of our wall. And what I used was a roll and maybe 2 rolls of adding machine tape. And I put the timeline on that, and then I used yarn to come down from it like these lines here. And then I'd have like a 3x5 card that said what happened, and up on the timeline we had the date. So that's another idea. But the reason why it would be best to do it like this in your actual journal is because then it's with all of your studies. So it's up to you how you do it. But I would recommend, if you're using some kind of other journal or notebook, I would really recommend using a flip out so that you can see it all at once. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to start on this. So we're going to flip this all out. We've got our gigantic timeline, which is really cool because Abraham lives to be 175 years old. So he needs a long timeline. Mine won't need as much. Okay, so we want to kind of look at the first and last events because that will tell us how much space we're going to use for each year. All right, so we've got Abraham was 75 when God called him to Canaan. And that's really where the story begins. This thing with Terah is kind of background, and you can include that or not. I would include it, but I'll show you how I'm going to include it. And then his death, he was 175. So it's 100 years, and that's why I'm saying I'm going to include Terah and family moving to Haran in a kind of different way, because 100 years is just going to make it so much easier for figuring things out. And that's like, Abraham's the perfect person for you to do your first timeline on if you've never done this before. Okay, so we know that God called Abram in 1920 BC. So he died 100 years later. So that would be 1820 BC. Remember that we're going, backward in our numbers because we're getting closer to 0. So 1820 is when he dies. So 100 years. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to figure out how much each year is going to be. Sorry, I just bumped my camera. So I'm going to use my calculator. Oh, and I have to measure first. I'm trying to remember all the steps that I did with you when I did this tape the first time. Okay, so this is 18 inches plus a little bit more than 14 inches, and so that's 32 inches. Okay, so 32 inches. is the length, plus a little bit more, okay, is the length of my timeline. So I'm going to figure out 100 years divided, or 32 inches divided by 100 years, okay? So we're going to use our calculator, and I'm going to clear that, okay? So I've got 32 inches, whatever your inches are, measure your timeline. Even if you made the Abraham journal, your timeline might be a little different from mine. So figure out how long it is, and put that in. 32 inches divided by 100 years. Okay, so that's 0.32. So 0.32, and if you're really good at math, you wouldn't have had to use the calculator for that, equals 1 year. Okay, so 0.32 inches. And if you're not from America, you're probably using centimeters. Go for it. That's a lot easier to figure out. I have to teach imperial measurements, inches and feet and yards and miles, to my Chinese kids, and I always apologize to them for America being a holdout on this. It's just ridiculous. We really should be on the metric system. It would be a lot easier for all of us, but so I apologize to you too, but this is it. Okay, so 1920 to 1820 is what we want to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is add in Abram's death. So I did that all the way here at the end. Okay, can you see that? I put in a dot on the line. I made a line with my ruler all the way across. I don't think I showed you that. And then I put a dot on the line at 1820, and let me actually write that year right there. 1820 BC. Okay, and then I made a line down here, and I put 1820 BC, Abraham dies, and he was Abraham at that point. And then I just put a rectangle around it. If you want to use your ruler to make a rectangle or a stencil, you can. I don't mind doing that. Now, I would use a ruler for the timeline itself and for your lines that come down. And the reason for that is because you're going to be having a lot of writing on this, and maybe even some pictures and stuff. And so having those straight lines makes it easier to find things. Your eye just is drawn to those things, even when there's a whole bunch of other messy stuff. Okay, so, oh, it looks like my pen got on there, sorry. Okay, so then we're going to go back to the beginning of Abram's life, and I had a little bit of space. It was a little bit more than 32 inches. So I made a little squiggly line arrow right there, okay, and I put Terah and family to Haran, 1925 BC, Genesis 11, 26 through 32. I want to put the references because that just makes it easier to look up. And I put up here at the top, 0.32 inch equals 1 year. Okay? So then our next event is in 1920 BC. God calls Abram to Canaan, and he's 75 years old. So I put that in here, 1920 BC. God calls Abram to Canaan. I put the reference, Genesis 12, 1 through 4. I actually want to add that he was 75 years old. That's really important. So I'm going to add that. Okay, then our other dates that we figured out, I've put those all in here. And since an inch is, since 0.32 inches equals 1 year, that's what I did, was I measured out 1/3 of an inch, or 5/16, I think is what I figured out it was. So 5/16 gets me each year. And so I've added each of those things in. Now there was one thing, a couple things. First of all, you can see that I have some things that go up and some things that go down, some things that go down farther than others. There's no rhyme or reason to that. That's just so that it doesn't get too crowded and so that I have space to write things. So it's just like depending on where there's space. Okay, so I entered in everything that I could. Now the one thing that we don't have a year for is back to the second altar between Bethel and Ai. We know that that happened sometime between 1918, when he went to Egypt, and 1915, when Abram and Lot split up. So I just split the difference and I put it in the middle, and I put a question mark because we don't really know when that is, okay, that he went back. So that's that. So I've got all these things written in. I'm not sure if you can see that well or not. I can't really tell what you can see. So then we've got all this space for the next 100 years. of stuff that we're going to add in. So that's our timeline. I don't think there's anything else to tell you about that. If you want to, if there's things that you want to color code in this, if like you want to color code all the altars and make those a certain color, you can do that. And you may not think of a way that you want to color code it right now, but you might think of it as you're studying, or you might think of it as you're studying somebody else, and then you want to go back and see where those things were in Abram's life. Then you can color code them then too. The other thing you can do if you want to is you can put in pictures of some things, if you have room. We may not have room. There's a lot that happens in Abram's life. He's a pretty exciting guy, but having a timeline like this helps us in a lot of ways. It's not just an academic exercise. So for example, one way that having a timeline of Abram's life and having studied Abram so much and having read his story a lot of times helped me is that back in 2000, God gave me a promise, and I knew that it probably would be many, many years. I mean, it's 2019, and that's not, I can see how it's going to be fulfilled, probably, but, and I had no idea back in 2000, but, I know to be patient, because it was 25 years from the time that God told Abram that he was going to be the father of many nations until Isaac was born. 25 years. That's a long time to wait. And you'll see as we study that how Abram got kind of discouraged. Sarah especially got discouraged. And so they made a huge mistake because of that discouragement that is still really affecting the world. And so, I learned from that to be patient with God's promises, and that he will eventually keep them. God always keeps his promises, but it's in his time, not ours. The disciples, Jesus' disciples, before he left, he told them that he was going to return. And